Welcome back, AP. Welcome back to your flipped classroom and our continuing discussion of European exploration. Really good job today in class. I was super impressed by a lot of you, right? A lot of you had really great thoughts and points and really connected things about European exploration that you already knew, and you actually demonstrated to me that you know a good amount of stuff, right? Like I think Kyla was on the side and she knew what smallpox was, and Grace knew exactly of course that there were other expeditions beyond ones like Columbus and included ones like the Mayflower and the Puritans that all relates to all of this stuff, right? So the thing about it is I'm really excited because it looks like y'all have something to work with. This is our first unit where it seems like y'all have some information that you can kind of ground yourself out with, okay? So let's go ahead though and pick up right where we left off in class because I don't want to make this flip too long because it's already kind of being late put up and stuff like that, and I want to actually keep it to a decent minimum time period. I'm shooting for under 25 minutes. I'd love under 20. Now, getting after it though, we left off in class talking about why hadn't the Europeans done this already? Why is it taking so long for the Europeans to actually explore this different stuff, to venture outside of their continent, to go where no man has gone before? Star Trek reference. Sorry about that. I know Ursa would be a big fan. Now, getting into it though, we talked about in class how during the Middle Ages there was very low technology. We talked about how during the this time period as well, Europeans are not going to actually venture out because the Venetians were providing all these different Eastern goods to the continent, yeah? And mostly also too as well that we need to understand is back when it was the Byzantine Empire, when it was actually the Byzantine Empire before it became the Ottoman Empire, they actually allowed other Christian traders to move around, okay? They allowed them to access the Black Sea, to traverse the Mediterranean, to move different items, and other cities in in Italy actually had access to these goods and could actually sail boats towards the Byzantine and pick up certain items. It wasn't just the Venetians, but places like Genoa, for example, was another city on the western coast of Italy that actually had access to the Black Sea trade routes back when it was the Byzantine. But all that's going to change when Constantinople falls, okay? You might want to go ahead and highlight that because literally, that's a big pivotal moment in world and AP European history, period, is that when Constantinople falls in 1453, a lot of things are going to change. The Ottoman Empire is going to develop a navy. They're going to actually start using it to put embargoes and limits on traders that can actually come in and out, especially Christian ones, because they are Muslim as an empire. And the thing about it, though, is that Constantinople used to be that place where everyone went to get all their stuff. But now it's not anymore, okay? You can't really go there, and it's causing a rise in prices because the Ottomans have now taken it over. And also we know that as well is that the Middle Ages just showed us that they just weren't ready for it for a long period of time. Yes, the Easterners were super advanced. Yes, people like Zhang He had a treasure fleet from ancient China. Well, not ancient, it wasn't ancient yet. It has a treasure fleet from the Eastern Golden Age time period of China where they would literally just go all the way from China all the way to the western coast of Africa, taking things like silk all the way to Africa and then bringing things back like mahogany wood and stuff like that. Because of people like Zhang He, we have discovered Chinese porcelain in places like Ethiopia. And like we talked about, he had these massive boats that were so big that literally dwarfed the size of a Spanish galleon, right? A Spanish galleon's about 80 yards long too. So this bad boy, the treasure ships that China was shipping around, were about the size of 2 football fields, right? Massive boats that could carry all this different stuff. And they lost one, and we're going to go find it. Like I said, Chris is going to be on front with a lantern and be like, oh my God. Now look, going into it though, also you have to understand that the richest man in the world literally came from Africa, right? During the medieval period. This is a picture of him right there, okay? His name is Mansa Musa. Now the thing about it is Mansa Musa used to lead over this thing known as the Malian Empire. And the Malian Empire had access to several mines where he could actually mine out things like gold and salt. And salt was literally worth its weight in gold because you needed it to preserve foods and also just to stay alive. But Mansa Musa had so much money and he converted to Islam as well, that when he went on his Hajj, a Hajj, by the way, is a pilgrimage that all Muslim people take from wherever they are to Mecca, Saudi Arabia, so they can actually go to the place where Muhammad actually founded their faith. They actually go to this place, and you've actually probably seen the place that they go to. It's called the Kaaba. It's the really big, so it's the temple that's covered in a black cloth, and it's also on your iPhone, right? It's on your iPhone. If you actually look it up, there's an emoji of it. Just call it Kaaba. And so now the thing about it, though, is he made a journey to that place when he was passing through places like Egypt and Libya and Tunisia. He actually ruined their economy because he had that much money. The richest man in the world was an African man that caused inflation in the places of which he traveled, right? That is absolutely wild. But again, why am I talking about these two people? Mansa Musa, Zhang He, just demonstrate to us that during the Middle Ages, the Easterners were more advanced, and they had these products, and they had these items that the Europeans eventually are going to need the Renaissance era to show up so they can learn how to get their hands on it, right? Because you had Marco Polo, who couldn't even get to China, And then also Christians believed that like guys like Prester John were still like living in Africa and stuff like that, which we know is absolutely wildly inaccurate. But during the Renaissance period, following some of the trading that's going to happen with some of the Easterners and stuff like that, like during the late Middle Ages, whenever they actually start trading with people from like closer to Anatolia and areas like that in northern Africa, they're going to learn how to use certain things that the Easterns have been using this entire time. One of the big ones includes this thing known as a caravel. Now, the big ones that were able to make it really, really good caravels were the Iberian caravels, which are going to be people off the Iberian Peninsula, which we'll talk about those two countries here in about 2 seconds. But caravels were actually a really, really important style ship that the Europeans are going to use so they can go further, faster, and do one all-important thing: sail into the wind. Caravels were actually much more nimble. It could easily move throughout the seas, but they also had these things called lateen rigs. And lateen rigs, as you can see right there, are triangular sails located towards the rear of the boat that actually allow you to sail into the wind. You got to do it in a zigzag, which is a big giant pain in the butt. But so whenever they actually were trying to go around Africa, which we'll talk about here in a little bit, it actually made it a really long and arduous process, and it took them decades to actually get around the entire continent. But still, you could sail into the wind, even though it's coming off the coast of Africa going north. We can still go in that direction that we could never go in before. Because during the Middle Ages, all the boats were square sailed, so you literally had to go with the wind no matter where you went. So another big thing that they're going to learn from the Arabic tribes, and then also that the Arabs learned originally from the Chinese, is a compass, right? And a compass, of course, being a very simple device that is attracted to the magnetic pole north of Earth, right? And so they actually can use this in conjunction with a couple of other items, including a chronometer, something that's going to be really, really important that you need to understand. Probably for the rest of your life, not so much at this moment. Literally GPS, navigation, cartography, actually understanding where you're going on a map does not also necessarily just include where you are on the planet, but you got to know when as well. And we'll get to why that is here in about 2 seconds, because literally the skies change all the time, and they use the skies to navigate in conjunction with things like compasses. Another big thing that they're going to come up with is the thing known as a stern post rudder. And a stern post rudder is a really, really simple design that they also learned from the Easterners, which is basically just a rudder on a post on the back of the ship, so they can easily pivot it back and forth and use it to go in those zigzag patterns, sail into the wind, and make their ships a little bit more navigable. Now, cartography is another really big development as well that's going to pop up during the late Middle Ages, that they're going to actually use this system to make sure that they know where they're going. Now look, speaking of cartography, what that is it's the science of map making, right? Now that right there, some of you are like, that's not a map, that's a globe. Okay, really, we're going to do this right now? A globe is literally just a map, like stretched around a sphere, okay? Now the thing about it though is that right there is a globe that was made in 1492. Suspiciously, also the exact same year that Columbus started off on his journey. Something that we need to dispel is a very vicious rumor that cartoons and stuff like that have told you throughout your entire life. Europeans knew the world was round the whole time, okay? They knew it the whole time. They knew for several thousand years that the earth was round. Ptolemy's geography, which was an ancient Greek, an ancient Greek scientist, he was the very first one to actually say, oh no, the earth is spherical, it is not flat. Actually, funny enough, the thing where most Europeans thought the earth was flat, when I say most Europeans, I mean Europeans who couldn't read and write very well, they thought the earth was flat because it says somewhere in the Old Testament that the earth is flat and that it's covered by a glass dome, okay? So the thing about it, though, is the people in the know, navigators, sailors, people like Christopher Columbus, they actually knew very well that the earth was round. Now, they were not right on where everything was located necessarily. They were a little off on how big some of this stuff, as you can see in this map right here, Saudi Arabia basically doesn't exist, and also some of the other little areas are a little bit big or left out, but the thing about it is they very well knew that the earth was round, but they used these new maps so they can navigate a little bit more reliably. Now, speaking of chronometers and knowing what time you are as well as where you are, you have to understand as well, knowing what time you are in conjunction with a device known as an astrolabe or a quadrant is going to be really, really important because it shows you on a map where you are, okay? Like, everybody can use a compass, right? You know where north is, right? You know where north is. I bet a bunch of y'all can sit in my class. We're going to see how many of y'all know where north is when you're sitting in my class tomorrow. It's going to be a little bit of a pop quiz. All right, so no, not an actual quiz. I'm not going to grade you on it. It's just going to be like something fun and cool to do. So going into it though, also astrolabes are really important because how you would use this device, or a quadrant is literally a quarter of an astrolabe. Astrolabes are typically circles. A quadrant is just a piece of it. It's about a 25%, 45 degree, or a 90 degree angle of an astrolabe. You actually use it to line up certain things in the sky or heavenly bodies, right? So you see this little holder right here, you would actually put like a little scope in it, and you would actually look at like the North Star, measure where it is based on the horizon, and it tells you where your latitude is, right? It tells you exactly degrees on that sphere of Earth where you are, and it helps you locate your position on the map itself. So these devices are super important for navigating. Now, this one is something that the AP curriculum doesn't necessarily put into this section, but I do think it's very important. Another piece of technology that's going to come up during the exploration period is that of guns and gunpowder. Okay, something that we need to understand is that when Europeans finally start making contact with people like natives and locals and people of different areas, including even Easterners, right? It's really, really kind of insane when you think about it that the Chinese around like 900 AD were the ones who invented gunpowder, which is a simple mixture of a couple of different chemicals, including carbon, usually for that from coal, and then also like as well as like sulfur and ammonium nitrate. You mix those two things, all those three things together in certain amounts, and you make an explosive powder that will create a blast, right? Now, the Chinese usually used it for like fireworks, displays, explosive devices for mining and stuff like that. It was the Europeans that realized that if you could take a metal tube and you stick a metal ball in front of it, that you can shoot and kill someone with it, right? And even going all the way up until the 1800s, Europeans were actively using guns, whereas like when they take over China during the imperial period going into the Opium Wars, the Chinese were still using swords mostly and bows and arrows. So the thing about it is guns and gunpowder are going to be a major thing that the Europeans are going to use to exact their force onto the people that they come across. So keep that in the back of your mind as well. Guns and gunpowder are very, very important. Now, we'll also talk about a little bit later on when we get to some of the native peoples, like the Aztecs, the Mayas, the Incas, and why forgeable metal is going to be a really big thing, but that's something we're going to save till tomorrow, all right? So the three big motivators of the Europeans is very, very important, and what I'm about to explain to you is something that college professors use this all the time to try and quantify down exactly what motivated the Europeans to go off and do this, right? To go off and take this scary, treacherous trail around the world in boats back in the day that were just as likely to sink due to a storm as they were to survive. Why would they do this, you might ask yourself? Well, the thing about it is the Portuguese actually put it the best, right? And they actually kind of boiled it down into three basic things that college professors still talk about all the time. And they all start with G. Now, if you've had a stellar history teacher in your entire existence, some of you might actually already know these because I've met a couple of people that actually went to, I think, St. Philip, that actually had a teacher that taught these three basic motivations, right? That the Portuguese originally set up, but basically they are. I'm going to see if you can guess them. The very first one that starts with G is a word that basically refers to them trying to find luxury goods from Eastern kingdoms, like silks, spices, and things like that, to make money off of. So we always say the very first motivation is gold, right? Basically what we're getting at is that they wanted to make buttloads of money off the things that they were finding, okay? Now, spices being one of the biggest ones, okay? Spices are really, really important, and they're not the only thing. A lot of teachers typically teach this as being like, oh, spices were the only product that they were really in search of. It's not necessarily true. It's the driving force. It's a big motivator because they made you a ton of money. So even in the Dutch language, I think I told you all this on the summer flip, I learned something really, really cool. I was in Amsterdam. The Dutch have literally a saying in their language, and it says, oh, it's pepperly expensive, right? Because it relates all the way back to when they had this thing called the East India Company. When they would actually go and get pepper and bring it back, it sold for that much money, right? And then also the other thing about it is it costs that much money. If you had pepper on your table during the like 1500s, 1400s, even before that, you basically had a Ferrari in the garage, okay? Because literally that's how expensive it was, and it was so hard to get, especially after the fall of Constantinople. It's going to become even more difficult to get. But spices also are not just used for flavoring food. They're also used for a couple of other purposes that I would like you to write down just so you know, okay? They're also used for making medicines, they're used for making luxury items like perfumes, and they're also used for preservation, okay? You can actually pack certain meats and things like that in spices, and they will stay better for longer. Now, the next thing that starts with G is really, really important, and we describe it as the motivation to spread Christianity. So what do we think that one is? It is none other than the motivator of God, right? So we got gold, God, and we got a third one coming up, but the spreading of Christianity is going to be kind of like a de facto thing that ends up happening, okay? So now the conquest itself of the like large European exploratory missions and stuff like that was mostly for domination, finding products, and making money. But a sedentary next up thing is that all the people they came into contact with, they wanted to try and spread Christianity, right? Now, interestingly enough, as European history progresses, not only are they trying to spread Christianity, but some of them are trying to also spread Protestantism, right? So something that you need to understand is that the Catholics, especially the Catholic countries during the exploration period, are going to try to push their like entire religion out there because they're feeling threatened, right? They're beginning to feel threatened by the fact that the Protestant sects are growing, so they actually want to try and spread Catholicism even further. farther and wider. You're going to see a lot of that activity from one special type of priest and an order of Catholic priests known as the Jesuits, right? Okay, now actually pronounced Jesuits, but anyway, the big thing about it is I know how some of y'all feel about Jesuits and Jesuit boys and stuff like that, but you can take that up with Mr. Wooderson and Mr. Mathern, who are avid Jesuit boys. Now, anyway, getting into it though in general, the last one, the very, very not least one whatsoever, and I kind of seriously think it might be the most important one because the other two things kind of fall underneath this last motivation, is that for the growth of military and political power, or what we say in class as glory, right? Exactly, okay? So glory, like literally, like what country wants to be the biggest and strongest? England wants to create more colonies so that they are bigger than their rival France, right? Amsterdam wants to make as many colonies to try and bring up the Dutch during their entire like liberation movement that they're going through. So it's a lot as well about the growth of the reputation and the status of the home country it's coming from. So going into it as well that you need to understand is why Europeans couldn't just go east before this. Now, a lot of people always ask this question. I think it's really, really important to talk about. Is they always ask themselves, they're like, wait a minute, Mr. Terry, how come they just didn't head east, right? Where they are in Europe, you didn't have to get in the water. You could have just like walked through Russia and then gone down into India. It would have been really, really easy to get there. Well, there are three main reasons why they couldn't just go east. And it has to do with the fact that the Muslim world does not allow Christian traders to travel through it because they are actually let me rephrase that. Because the Muslim traders were like, these are our items and products to bring to you, not the other way around, okay? So that we need to understand that very, very heavily. And most of them being located in the Middle East and also in Northern Africa, right next door to Europe. Bad weather and big mountains is another big reason why you couldn't just go east, because most of Siberia that you would have to traverse through during like certain times of year, it's going to be frozen and permafrosted and borderline impossible to navigate. And the last one is this conversion of these people known as the Mongols, okay? So if I'm drawing a little bit of stuff on this map right now, we're seeing all this little blank map, and this place right here, that of Europe, wants to get to this place, and they want to get to this place, right? They want to get like certain items from China. They also want to get them from India as well. Well, let's talk about the Muslim world first. So if I actually change the color of this a little bit, just so you can see it, we'll change it to green real fast. Muslim kingdoms basically existed all through here in North Africa, have now taken Constantinople all through the entire Middle East, and they have literally locked down all those areas so traders cannot actually pass through them. So that's not an option for them. So some of you are like, well, why can't you just go through this region? Well, a lot of it has to do with the fact that the Mongols live there, okay? So the Mongols live in all this general area, and then actually at one point expanded all the way into the entire eastern area of Russia. They actually expanded to their greatest extent under a man by the name of Genghis Khan that you've actually probably heard of before in your geography class. Well, the thing about it is early on when Marco Polo actually went, the Mongols allowed him to pass through. But what's going to happen that's going to be very, very important is the Mongols are going to convert to Islam, and so they're going to stop letting Christian traders through. But I just skipped one as well that I didn't fully explain. Another one is just simply bad weather and a bunch of big mountains, because there's these really big mountains that actually are right on top of India, right here, called the Himalayas, that prevent you from coming in from the north, and also this entire region is super cold for most of the year, and it's almost impossible to pass through. So those big reasons are why they couldn't go through land, and they had to strike out into the oceans and head this way and figure out a way to go a roundabout way or go all the way around Africa to get to these two areas right there, right? So the other big thing that you need to understand going into, okay, stop it. Now let's go away. Take the add-on away. Make it stop. There we go. All right, let's go ahead and get back to full screen real fast. There we are. And now, so let's keep on going and keep on grinding a little bit so you can understand why all this stuff is so important, right? Now, going into it, though, you also need to understand the very first two countries that are going to get involved in all this stuff. Who do you think, off the top of your head, are going to be the first two countries that actually get actively involved inside of the European exploration game? Well, that is so smart of y'all, because I just heard all of you just stand up and say it. Every one of y'all was like, oh, Mr. Terry, you mentioned the Iberian Peninsula earlier, which, of course, you were talking about Iberian caravels. And we all know as well that the Iberian Peninsula is home to two different countries, that being Portugal and Spain. Wow, y'all might be the best and smartest AP class I've ever met in my entire existence. Y'all are blowing my mind. This is ridiculous, right? Now, ironically enough, I was being sarcastic, but not about the smart thing. Y'all are all wicked smart, but I'm talking more along the lines of the fact that y'all knew that the Iberian Peninsula had those two countries on it. Now, I know one of you is going to come in here tomorrow and be like, I knew that. I get it. I'm joking. It's not a big deal. Like, take a laugh a little bit. Now, look, going into it, though, we got to always start off with Portugal, okay? So the thing that you have to always start off with when you're talking about Portugal is you have to start off with the fact that basically those monarchs that were growing in power are the ones that, are the reason why Portugal begins to explore some stuff, okay? So the thing about it is that the fourth son of the current Portuguese king, when they were actually in power during the early 1400s, going up to 1460, because it's when this guy died, his name was Prince Henry the Navigator. Now, this man was never going to be king. king, right? He had several brothers in front of him, and everyone knew that the chance of him becoming king is slim to none. But he's very, very well known for financing and sponsoring massive voyages with one goal set in mind: to get to the Indian Ocean, to become a part of that monsoon marketplace, and begin to bring those Western goods back so everyone can begin to use them. Now, the thing about it is he did this even before Constantinople ever even fell. He actually knew and predicted that Constantinople would eventually either fall to the Ottoman Turks, or you do the smart thing, which is what we talked about in class, just go to the source and get the stuff that you need, right? So the thing about it is he financed several large voyages, and his plan was to hook it around Africa, right? And as we can see right here, going all the way back into the 1430s, the Portuguese plan was to try and go all the way around Africa to get to India and establish a trade route that came all the way back. Now, the hard part is this is going to be very difficult because a massive set of trade winds come up off the African coast and push upwards into Portugal. So they couldn't actually do this until the caravels and the compasses and the navigational tools that were developed a little bit later on. But over time, they're going to slowly start frog hopping and lily pad hopping all the way down. They also set up a couple of different bases in the Azores Islands and stuff like that. And unfortunately, Prince Henry the Navigator is going to die in 1460. So he does not ever actually live to see Portugal get all the way to India. He only ever actually lives to see them get halfway down the coast of Africa. But the thing about it, though, is the results of his financing of these voyages is very, very important. Because what's going to happen is the Portuguese are going to establish several things that are going to change history for several hundred years. If not, you could argue, even up to this day, right? The Portuguese are going to establish an African slave trade system. They are going to literally try to use Africa and all of its content and all of its people to try and make as much money while they're trying to get to India as possible. Because Africa was very, very wealthy in a lot of several things, like foodstuffs, and then also people, and then also things like gold and silver and other products as well. And the Portuguese are going to start the most awful thing that's ever happened in history, that being of the African slave trade system. They're going to establish forts all along the coast and actually make deals with African tribes to begin the creation of a slave trade system that will affect the Western world for several centuries and even affects us now until this day. They're also going to begin sugar farming on the western coast of Africa. They're going to try and use African resources as well, but trying to find that entire route to India. Now, two later Portuguese explorers are going to come along that are going to actually successfully get all the way there. That being Bartholomew Diaz, who's going to get to the very, very bottom of Africa. But when he got down there, he told everyone back in Portugal, was like, I don't know if we will ever make it past the southern tip of Africa because the storms there are so bad that they will sink any voyage that tries to get past that southern tip. So he actually referred to it as the Cape of Storms, right? Now, the interesting thing, though, is there was one Portuguese sailor that came about a decade later in 1498 that shows up and says, no, I will be the one that renames that cape, right? And he is the very first person to try and take a trip there and back. He is the very first person that actually gets past the Cape of Storms, gets all the way to India, and gets all the way back with a massive set of spices that sell for a ridiculous amount of money, right? And he actually, because of that, renames that southern tip of Africa the Cape of Good Hope. He also used some really dicey tactics to do this entire thing, and we'll talk about those tactics a little bit in class. But he used direct violence onto the Muslim kingdoms that he met outside of Calicut, where he literally killed people to get them to open the door to his entire trade route, which is absolutely ridiculous. But in the process, because of people like Bartholomew Diaz and Vasco da Gama, the Portuguese are now going to be trading in spices, silks, porcelains, teas, slaves, sugar, and many other items, making them what was a very poor country now a ridiculously wealthy country. And if we actually take a gander at this right here, you can see on this map that this was their route all the way around Africa to get to that city right there called Calicut, where literally Vasco da Gama is going to kill 30-something fishermen off the coast just so they open up and actually trade with him, because they didn't want to do it because they were like, look, we don't want to trade with you. You're a Christian. We heard that y'all are not very good guys, and we're Muslim. We don't do that. And so literally he's like, oh, I'm just going to cut everybody's heads off. And it's really, really screwed up. But we'll talk about that a little bit later on. So the thing about it, though, is then he actually comes all the way back. And following his voyage, they refer to that southern tip of Africa as the Cape of Good Hope. But when they get to India, the Portuguese begin to set up trade bases all over the southern coast of India so they can try to corner the market in those spices and goods, okay? And we'll talk about it a little bit later on, how someone is actually going to oust them out a little bit later on, that being the Dutch in their wooden clogs. And we're going to go to Amsterdam and actually see all that different stuff, speaking of the Dutch. But Spain is going to be another very, very important one as well. Spain, of course, as you know, when you're talking about it, you usually always talk about this guy. That guy being, of course, Christopher Columbus, okay? Now, Christopher Columbus, the big thing that we need to understand about him is that's not even what he looks like. We actually have no idea what Christopher Columbus looks like because he didn't actually have enough money and he died in disgrace. So the thing about it that we need to understand, though, is we're actually going to cut the flip off right here. In the class tomorrow, we're going to talk about Spain, Isabella and Ferdinand, and how Columbus are going to take on this explorationary tactic and practice, and they're going to change the world forever. But I'll see y'all soon.